All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is our second episode for the year 2022. This is episode 224. So there's lots of twos in our show tonight, but we've got three people here to talk about our games and news stories of the week. Joining me tonight, Swissguard. This is your first time back after the New Year holiday break. So welcome back, sir. How are you doing?
Doing all right. It's been a while. I don't know if it's going to take me a little while to knock the rust off, I think.
That's
I've already
okay.
had some technical difficulties heading in, so
This is why we do it, to knock the rust off ourselves and each other and give us a chance to air some grievances, some concerns, air some enjoyments as well. So I'm glad to have you back. It has been since, wow, a few weeks before Christmas when we did our end of the year superlative show. Thank you for leading us through that. And I'm glad to have you back tonight. Also, manning the boards over there is Game Logic. Game Logic, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm good. I'm good.
That is. Thank you for being so expounder. That's excellent.
It's always a very
Very
short intro when
Yes,
I'm actually
that's
still running things.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to give you more time. We're trying to talk here. I see you moving around. Thank you for all the work you're doing, making sure things are running on the back end. That is great, as we are live tonight on YouTube. And if you're listening to us afterward on Spotify or any other of your podcast networks, we are glad to have you here as well. So, in the Enough to Keep Going podcasts, for the last 4 years, we have spent time back and forth between a playlist show, our game experience show, and then the alternating weeks talking about industry news, industry analysis. And starting into this year, we're kind of blowing that format up a little bit and rethinking about it in terms of what that looks like. And last week, what that looked like is a whole lot of games that we were playing over the course of the holiday break. But tonight, as we're in the alternative week, our alternative week isn't really going to be drastically different. But one of the things that we're going to weave in week by week is some news stories that are connected to maybe the games we're playing. If there's things that are tangential or relevant into the games that we're playing, it gives us a chance to talk about some of that. But also in the top section, where we usually either cover new games or news stories, we're going to dedicate some time to that as well, because we came together not only to discuss what we're playing, but also to talk about why we play and what the industry means and how it impacts not only us as gamers, us as parents, but in terms of how it affects others as well. And so as we did last year and spent a number of times talking about Activision Blizzard and the number of harassments and lawsuits around them, there are news issues that boil to the top for us, that we need a platform. We want a platform to engage with you on, to engage with each other on. So hopefully that as we're having these conversations, we hope that you'll join in. I hope that you'll provide us some feedback, some comments. If you're watching live, feel free to chat as we go. But with that all said, in terms of a preface, we've got two news stories here that kind of still tie into that theme of harassment, toxic communities, and the challenges that the gaming community still faces. So our first news story is about Riot Games, who settled a lawsuit for $100 million. This was back a few years ago, 2018. But this week, they're on the 11th, 2 days ago, they have the new blog post that is laying out their 5-year plan. And that 5-year plan is calling for more openness, an end of harassment and a toxic culture, places that creative work in a diverse a diverse community. So they're putting forth what they are hoping to move toward. And then today, they are also saying, if you're not on board, we've got the money to wish you farewell. So we've got the first story here in terms of Riot Games, both their 5-year plan of trying to address some of the concerns and the lawsuits and the harassment and the toxic culture that they have come up against over the number of years here. And also now that they're saying, if you don't agree with that plan, we are going to offer you the 25%, basically a 20% buyout. That it is, we will pay 25% of your salary up to a certain amount and include 3 months of benefits if this is not the direction that you want to be going. So, in some ways, this is not unique to corporate America in terms of providing some type of buyout as a new CEO comes on and provides that type of direction. Sometimes these buyouts do shake the trees loose in terms of people who do not want to be part of that mission. Granted, the mission that they're putting forward is hard not to, it's, hard to argue against in terms of let's be a less toxic community and workplace. No, thank you. I'm going to leave. Or the other piece of this is that it potentially cuts both ways, is that people that have been experiencing this community, this type of toxic work environment, may also see this buyout as a great opportunity to get out. That if the confidence is not there, that there really is change, that this is also an opportunity for people to consider whether this is where they still want to be, if they have the option of getting out in someplace else.
I would actually pitch for those people. It's a confidence booster, right? Because to me, like what you were saying about it's not unusual in corporate America. To me, it's not necessarily unusual, but I will also say it's definitely not considered mandatory by most employers. Most employers will do an org shift and bring in new leadership, and you will not be given the option of a buyout. You will be told, get with the new program, toe the line, or get out, and you will be taken out. And right? And I've just been involved in a recent conversation on Twitter with a person who's just like my state, which is a right to work state, right? Like nobody is required to give anybody 2 weeks notice, right, on either side, the employer or the employee. So you can just be jettisoned without really having a lengthy discussion about it. So my feeling is that the people who are part of the toxic environment, they're getting a bonus, right? They're getting a Benny, because this is not like what you would usually expect. And so for the people who question whether or not the corporate leadership is really committed to really changing its stripes, this to me is a clear, tangible signal that they are, because what they're saying is we are willing to pay and put our money where our mouth is to get the culture to change.
I would agree with you, right? I mean, for the sake of discussion, I may have been devil's advocating it, but I think it does have that potential, but I completely agree with you that really the norm in corporate America is not a buyout unless you're in a very upper level executive leadership. The norm is, here's your papers. Thanks for your service. We don't need you anymore. And this is exactly the case of we're willing to bite into our profits. We're willing to pay off some things in order to make that tangible change. And I think that what it also does is that anybody that's left standing after that buyout period, it allows their HR department to hold a firm line that these are our expectations. You agreed to this, and this is the direction that we're moving. And so I think that it does provide some real positive, constructive leadership, which after spending 8 months talking about Activision Blizzard and the carousel of leadership and the kind of rallying behind the toxic culture of the leaders at the top, this is the first time to see a significant company really put money behind the platitudes of diversity, equity, gender inclusion, and kind of providing equal opportunities across the board. And so I would agree with you, Game Logic, that this is a strong commitment. Swiss, any thoughts here, or we're going to segue into our related story?
Well, this is the first, every time I've seen a move like this, it always usually indicates, in my past experience, like dark clouds on the horizon. but I think, it's that, they call it out at the very beginning. They're not trying to cut costs or anything like that. But so yeah, I think I would tend to agree that it's a bold move by the company to, just shake things up. And like you said, they're, rather than just having some corporate buzz speak and maybe playing musical chairs at the top a little bit, but nothing really changing. They're definitely trying to, whether, you know, they're definitely trying to get buy-in moving forward, I think. So, like you said, from the HR department with the demarcation line, like, I think that's a good way of putting it. But I think for me, the more like, I'm going to be interested to see if other companies follow like a similar path. Like, is this going to blaze a trail of like how you handle a series of I don't want to say negative publicity because it goes deeper than that, but you know what I mean. It's like how do companies really try to reinvent themselves?
Yeah, to enact kind of significant cultural structural change is difficult within any type of you know small b bureaucracy of a operation. That there are structures in place that make wholesale changes difficult on purpose, and that this is one avenue to try to kind of break some of that inertia up.
Well,
Logic, do you have something else to add here?
Well, my hope is that the precedents that we'll see repeated is kind of the cultural changes that have been yielded in the tech industry out of cataclysmic events like the Microsoft. What I want to say. I don't want to say bankruptcy. I want to say, and I don't want to say monopoly. I want to say.
Oh yes, the rulings about breaking up some of Microsoft within Internet Explorer.
Yeah. So what happened out of that is the cultural landscape of the tech industry in Silicon Valley was inalterably changed, right? I mean, that change in behavior and the way that they went about business, first of all, allowed the actual existence, right, and coming into being of Google and Facebook, right? Had that trust lawsuit like not happened, right, Microsoft probably would not have allowed those two things to come into existence in the way in which they did. And then on top of that, the types of behaviors that those two companies represent, right, and even Apple and Amazon, right, tech companies today attune themselves a little bit, not entirely, there's still a slight amount of tone deafness, right? But they attune themselves to when they are approaching lawsuit territory, right? And they start veering course, right? They don't do what Microsoft did, which was just dedicatingly trudge forward, convinced that no one was willing to topple them and take them on. And so I'm hoping that these lawsuits that have been rendered to Riot and the lawsuits that have been rendered to Activision put people on notice and say, we need to kind of go about making a change and start to be a little more cautious of these legal entities that may come after us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of what those potential ripple effects are. And given that there's a number of companies who are facing these issues, there's certainly opportunity to potentially see some significant change and effort. So our second story is also along the same lines of harassment and toxic communities, but creating a structural change here is going to be a significant lasting change is a whole lot more challenging because it's about us as players. It's about us as game consumers and gaming culture. So, Game Logic, why don't you talk about the G4 story of Indiana Black, one of the new G4 hosts, and the comments around what she had to say in terms of how coverage is perceived and feedback is given within G4 and social media.
Yeah, certainly. For some reason, I could not remember the term antitrust lawsuit. I don't know why that was, but that's what I was referring to. So the topic of conversation of Frostcorin and the statements that Frostcorin and the statements that she made on G4 TV. So Frostcorin went in, who is one of the co-hosts on G4 TV and comes out of the League of Legends European Championship circuit. She was a shoutcaster, and went on air and pretty much went into a tirade about the way that women are objectified in the way that there is.
Can we change the word tirade, because that's got some negative connotations along with it as well, right?
Yes, certainly.
She was very vocal in expressing what this experience is.
Yeah. I use the word tirade because I think it's actually a positive tone, meaning like when I get spooled up and I have to go on a tirade to get people to listen, then that's a condition that people have pushed me to, not something that I've chosen to do.
Sounds good. Thank you for the clarification.
Right, sorry. And went on about how there is bias in the feedback that the channel receives, as well as just direct and overt discrimination. So I'm going to kind of tilt a little bit of the story and talk about kind of my own interpretation of it, right? Because I think most gamers are fairly familiar with what she went on about during her looks like it was about 3.5 minutes, 3-minute 45-second monologue. Because the things that have bothered me about it is people have tried to tie it to a singular instance, and people have tried to associate it with some comments that she made, I think roughly 3 weeks ago, that were negative in her opinion of the PlayStation platform, as well as making an error on air about the exclusivity of one game that that she claimed was on one platform that should have been on the other. All of those things are beneath my radar, right, eye level of significance. I think what is significant about this and what needs to be talked about this is that I would refuse to listen to anyone who claimed that anything that she said was not true, right? Anyone who suggests for a moment that there's not bias and discrimination against women in the gamer community is just living inside a reality distortion bubble that I'm not interested in having a conversation with that person, right? We've spent almost the entire year talking about the behaviors at Activision, Ubisoft, Riot Games, now Bungie, right? And just about every other developer of significance, right, on the planet, right, with regards to how they treat most minority issues and how there's kind of a culture. Quantic, what is the French developer who does this?
Quantic Dream.
Yeah, kind of same thing, right? So come on, right? Please don't use that as an excuse. The other thing I would say is that rather than focusing on her solely on her indications of misogyny, right, extrapolate that to what the baseline behavioral problems are in the gaming community, and that is that whenever someone leverages and lodges an opinion that is not in line and in support of your given platform, your given storefront, your given game developer, franchise, whatever, the tendency to react in a manner and invoke things in the conversation that have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the conversation on games is far too large of a percentage of the typical conversation that characterizes most exchanges in the gaming community, right? It's one of the things that bugs me being on something like Twitter, where I'm like, if I mention that, I don't know, pick a piece of equipment, that I like the Elgato Stream Deck, I am 10% likely to get a comment on my open public tweet that is somebody else who loves working with Elgato equipment, and 90% likely to get a comment from some rando who wants to say that the Elgato Stream Deck is trash, and then the second step in the conversation will be them indicting my entire ancestry, my family, my dog, right? And this is the problem with the verbiage, with the language in the gaming community. People don't keep it to the games, and people don't simply keep it factual, and people don't simply agree to disagree, right? And so it extrapolates and the snowball starts furballing and winds up being this kind of behavior. The other major problem that I have with a lot of the dialogue that's going on around this thing is that people have tried to say, well, because she said some things people didn't like, that's why she got the feedback she got, and it's not really about misogyny. And I'm like, that is, as DBQ and I were talking before, that is the exact same language, the same language as people who say, for a woman who is raped or sexually assaulted, is the same type of language that begets the, she asked for it, what was she doing in that neighborhood, in that part of town, why was she dressed that way? And to level set it, at least kind of from my perspective, and the way I look at it and deal with it, is if a female, minority, whatever, comes to me as a manager in the tech industry or an HR department and says, I've been sexually harassed, I've been sexually assaulted, whatever, we are specifically trained to not couple into that same conversation, well, what's your performance like? How good of a worker are you? Oh, you don't work hard, and so therefore that's why you got done what happened to you, and maybe you should grow a thicker skin. That's not the way that we treat people. That's not the way that we make people feel included, right, in a community or an organization. And the people who have that view are just flat out wrong. And a lot of the inherent nature of people and kind of how they view humanity was kind of revealed and surfaced this week through their observation of that event and their comments on it. A lot of people, in my personal opinion, kind of embarrassed themselves and showed them to be less of the citizens of the gaming community that I would have expected them to be. And so maybe in the future it would be just best, if you think that way, to just maybe not comment on it, right, and move on, which has been another, topic of conversation and thought for me this morning about how, people in social media will just comment negatively on things that they overhear. And I'm like, in real life, like, would you make that comment or would you just mind your business and move on? So it's unfortunate. I think she was definitely reflecting accurate information. And it's definitely a thing that needs to change in the gaming community. And people shouldn't let it happen. People shouldn't give people a pass. The last thing I'll comment on it is I think a big part that was missed, and this is unfortunately like a typical analysis that I'm quickly and easily able to make, is that, I listen intently to a thing that goes on, and then I see the takes that people make on it, and I see the facts and the chronology that they miss, right? And one of the key discussion points in her speech that people missed was the fact that that channel has been running experiments to see and do data trend analysis, essentially, right? Maybe at a subjective layer. I'm not going to comment and say that it was super disciplined from like the way I approach data analytics, but I also don't think any of them have architected a database in third nominal form, right? So my point is that
it's not the methodology, it's
right.
It's the process, right?
Right. And it doesn't need to be super accurate to 0.000 like points of precision. And so what they've been saying is that they've been having what I believe and understand is a third person, so somebody who's not on the televised cast panel, right? Because she mentioned that they have a publishing staff that includes additional people now, that they've been having another person or another group of people who will write a script. They will have the white male on the cast read half of the script, and then she will read the other half. And she mentioned like that has been done by other members of the cast as well. And what they have seen is that they have seen a disproportionate amount of vitriol lodged at her, reading from the same script that yet another person wrote, right, than the other guy gets. And she mentioned that the same is true for her other co-hosts who are also minorities. At least there's one African-American gentleman. I think the other gentleman is Hispanic. I'm not absolutely certain. But I mean, my point is that she talked about information that they've corroborated through at least some low-level type of experiment, right? Pulse check, just to see what's going on. And again, the people who tie it to a singular isolated incident, right? Maybe I don't even really care if it's a trend, right? If a person says negative things, right, that you don't like because they have a different opinion, that doesn't give you the right to go off and slander their, sexuality and gender and, their looks. That's another thing that she mentioned, that, some of the comments in the live stream and in the comments after, they post their YouTube videos were just about how, she compares at an attractiveness level like to the last co-host, and like I just don't get it. So inappropriate. Shame on us, right? People should be better human beings.
Thank you, Game Logic. Yes, I agree. I mean, I think the piece here, and the reason I wanted to hit this, is that we've spent a lot of time talking about game companies and their challenges in terms of their community. And while, yes, these are not new issues for the gaming community, we have certainly encountered them over the last decade and more at this point. But even as the spotlight has gone off of the players and onto the companies and developers, it's still important to bring that back and to see if we've made any change. And unfortunately, in things like this, we haven't, or at least that there are still vocal enough groups that make it a place that is not inviting to all. And ideally, this is a hobby. This is a form of entertainment that is open and inviting to all different players of all, identities. And as parents, all three of us, all four of us on this show, hope that the communities that we enjoy, that our kids have the potential to be part of, is also someplace that is constructive for whoever may be there. Swiss, we both got a chance to be on our soapbox for a little bit. Any thoughts here before we turn to what we've been playing?
I don't have much of a soapbox. I just, I'm Catholic. I try to live my faith, and you treat every human being with dignity and respect. So I kind of just start from there, and I don't. Sometimes I chafe at like the royal we. One of the reasons I really appreciate E2KG is because we can have a conversation about games, whether we're from different backgrounds or like wherever. We're just coming in and enjoying our hobby, and we generally are friends. We comment, like we keep up with each other's families and everything, and it's just I don't know. Like I try to, maybe it's just I'm pulled myself out of social media so much that I just can't, maybe I've just siloed myself. I don't know. I'm not saying this is not saying that it doesn't happen. Like I am keenly aware of the moral cesspit that is social media. Like I get that. But I guess I just have tried to transcend it. I don't know the proper term. It's just like I know that what I can control, and what I can control is, how I engage with whatever limited gaming communities I'm a member of. Like I have a few other Discord servers that I belong to. I belong to E2KG, and like you said, as a parent, I try to form my kids in a certain way, and it's hard. Like with stories like this, it's difficult for me to think. Okay, I think about it. I'm like, well, what do I do? Does me sending off like a tweet or something to that effect, is that really going to change anything? Or is it just me adding to the cacophony of the quote unquote debate on the internet? It's not really. It's just a bunch of flame wars. So I don't know. I know this is just like a stream of consciousness thing. I wish people would see the inherent dignity in every other human being and treat them that way. I think C.S. Lewis actually said, whenever you see another person, you're seeing an immortal. And, he's getting, obviously, he was referring to like the soul and everything. But when you actually contemplate that and put it in context and think about it, meditate on it, it's like, wow, how am I? But and then you see how people treat each other. Like, and I'm not just on like whatever G4 whatever, just the supermarket on the street. This is when you're taking a walk on the street. It's just every human being is an immortal. So it's I don't know. That's my stream of consciousness take on it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the points you raise, Swiss, are obviously valid, right? And it's some of the conversation that went on about the topic, which is like, well, she said all that stuff, but like you're never gonna change, right, that behavior by people, and I'm like, I don't know that that's acceptable, right? And I don't know that that means we should just stop trying, right? Like that behavior. Oh no, and
yeah.
I'm not saying
I'm not saying that it was like it's not going to end, so who cares? Like I don't want to have. It's like not a nihilist. I'm not trying to be nihilistic about it. It's more just like what can I control, and I can control what community, like how I treat people. That's what I can control, and and the hope is that that will spread. Sometimes obviously, people need to be corrected. It's just hard when you're trying to correct people in like a social, like in a social media context like that. It's a very, I'll just say it's an uphill slog. Hopefully some people think about what happens. I think a lot of people will it's just another salvo in the troll wars or whatever you want to call them. So
yeah, absolutely. It's wallowing with the pig, and I wasn't trying to suggest that that's what you were saying. I was trying to use what you had said to segue over to write some other dynamics of the conversation.
Sorry.
No, not at all. And so that was one of the things, right, to be arbitrated, right, is this notion that there's no use speaking out against it because like you're never going to change that behavior. And one of the things that's problematic to me, and the other reason I wanted to comment on what you said, because it's a good time to just highlight and raise some issues up. One of the things that people don't understand or don't get is, we could easily do this podcast and not stream it live, and I could easily not have this monitoring board up over here watching, right, to see if anybody comes into chat, because we don't often have a lot of people that come into chat, right? But every once in a while we do, and I don't know how I want to characterize it. Every once in a while, right, those people drop inappropriate things in the chat about our race, right? My race, right? 50% of my videos over on the Rounding Off Infinity channel, I disable comments on, right? And on my blog, I disable all comments on, because it is greater than a 50% chance that any person making a comment is going to make a comment about my race and not about what I've actually written or not about what I've actually live streamed, right? And that is just a problem. And one of the things that I get concerned about and that I've been trying to kind of untie in my mind as I've thought about it this week is the culture and the society of man rose up, right, and formulated in the real world. And then we migrated that to the digital space, right? And what I'm concerned about to a certain extent is that it must be feasible and possible for the opposite to eventually come true. That behavioral norms that will grow into being in the digital space will eventually migrate back out into the real world. Right? One of the, for instances, is language, right? We started painting on cave walls, right? And hieroglyphics, and that became a normative in the digital world, right? And it is now, to a certain extent, transferable back to the real world in terms of our behavior and how we intercommunicate. And so one of the things that I think has to be observed and watched and monitored is whether or not, as we become more insensitive, right, to the treatment of other human beings in the digital world, is for that to spill back into the real world, right? And we already have problems in the real world where something bad happens to someone and people walk by, right, and ignore it. And that is, right, amplified a million times in the digital world. So I don't know. It's just the whole thing, right, is a tough nut. And it is absolutely like soul crushing if you participate in it, right? Because you're right, it's pushing a boulder uphill, and like, what in the world, can you do about it? But I don't know. I view it from even though I'm wearing a Punisher hat, I view it from a Captain America perspective, right? Which is that you plant yourself right by the river, right, and you tell everybody else to move, right? You don't become the person who becomes malleable and essentially kind of change your ethics and your morals and how you are willing to engage in injustices that you see passing you by. And so I don't know. It was an interesting thing to see unfold, I guess is what I'll say.
Well, and I appreciate this discussion. I think that there's value in having this opportunity to talk about not only the issue here at G4 that was raised, but also the issues that both of you gentlemen have raised as well. And so, to your point of make the change that you can, treat people with dignity and impact those around you, right? I think that this is an opportunity not only for us to have that conversation that hopes, for me, it makes me more cognizant of when I head back into a workplace environment, that somebody listening to this stream or on this podcast hears it, and hopefully they consider how they interact and do they treat others with dignity. And so we do have the potential to, it's a small stone in a giant ocean, but we can start making some ripples. So I appreciate the conversation. And I think that this is a good opportunity to do that. And now it's a good opportunity to transition out and talk about just some other games. I've got some games that tie into some news stories of the week, but Swiss, since you were not here last week in our kind of post-holiday Game-a-Palooza, I want to hear about what some of the things that you've been playing. And so last week, I talked about Gunfire Reborn as my Pickz plays assignment in terms of the roguelike first-person shooter kind of run-based. So what's your experience been with it?
Yeah, so a friend purchased a copy for both my wife and I, and we had we both played it by ourselves and we played it together. I was kind of a little bit nervous about it because of the roguelike elements. Why are you laughing, Game Logic?
Because I was going to say, as we all should be. I was gonna see where you were to go, because I am almost absolutely certain the last time you were on, there was some specific comment about the fact that you're not a roguelite person, and I don't think any of us are at our core. So I just kind of wanted to hear how you fell down the slippery slope.
Well, it's because the gunplay is good, is what it boils down to. The roguelike doesn't feel like. It just feels like, hey, how far? I mean, I don't want to say that the roguelike elements are downplayed, because they're there. Okay, yeah, you go and you level up, and because you level up a little bit, you can maybe push a little bit farther. But mostly it's not so front and center. To me it just feels like, okay, you're playing through and you're maybe getting a little bit better as you play through. So I guess that's kind of a roguelike. I don't know.
But I think it's not as punishing, because there is some progression, but also at least in my experience, I think you're right. Like, the gunplay is satisfying and there's enough skill to it that it doesn't feel like you're just suddenly you don't have the right tools to get through a map.
I think that's probably a good way to put it. I don't feel like the game is artificially tying my hands together. It's just like, and maybe it's just old school in that, like, you play it and then as you kind of inch your way, like, until you conquer a level. And I felt like that was more the style than me feeling like I did when I played what was that, Into the Breach, which was like a roguelike strategy game thing, where I just was like, how you I can't beat this level, and when can I? And it felt unfair. This just feels like the challenge is a little bit scaled differently than your typical modern shooter. But it's okay because the gunplay is good. The speed, the pace of the game is not so fast that it's like it's not like a Doom type, like you're flying around the level. It's fast enough to feel uh feel pressured and a little bit hectic, but not so much but you still feel like you're in control. And it, like, there's projectiles that you can like literally dodge and stuff. So it just finds that sweet spot. It's really hard to. It was slower than I anticipated it being. I saw this cartoon game, and it's a shooter, and like I just expected it to be super light and just not very substantial when you move around. But I feel good when you move, and then the headshots feel good, and it feels nice to play. So I feel like it's Destiny 2 without the fear of missing out. That's what I feel like.
Or with the lack of 6 different currencies to try to figure out.
I can just go in there, and it feels like when you go into like a now I can't even remember the term, like a dungeon or whatever in Destiny 2, and you just try to work your way through. Like that's
little lost sector. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, to me, it's very consumable because the room to room kind of breaks up the pace. That there's a flow to each room, but then you get a breather as you move from room to room, and then it doesn't feel, it doesn't have that kind of Borderlands or big kind of open world first person where you're going to spend a half hour trying to get to a mission in order to go through it and continue to respawn. Like it's short play bursts of hopefully satisfying gameplay. And I do have a question though, because when I've played it, I've only played it single player. When you and Vela have played together, does it feel like, are there more enemies that are spawning? I mean, does it scale for the number of players?
I couldn't tell. It must a little bit, because like in my single player playthroughs, in my multiplayer, I don't feel like the multiplayer suddenly we flew through the levels much faster. So there must be a few more enemies a little bit. And like you go through the level and you get to the boss, and it wasn't like, oh, now that there's 2 of us, we can beat the boss. It still felt the same as I played it single player before I played multiplayer, and then went back to single player. So the experience felt the same. It was just like, now we're doing it with your friends or your family. So it and like you said with the runs, that just makes it makes it easy to play with somebody, because you can just jump in and start going, and you shoot a bunch of stuff. That being said, I have guns that I've liked and guns that I don't. So when you start, you don't bring any equipment with you. So it's like you kind of build that all up as you go, and you get the random drops of power ups and stuff as you go, which it's fine. But sometimes I wish I could kind of control what I had. But on the whole, it just, since it feels nice to play, I'm going to continue to play it.
Nice. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way with the Anacrusis. I talked about this last week. It launched today, actually, in early access. But it's that Left 4 Dead. It's by Stray Bombay, but you start with 3 different weapons all the time. You have an SMG, an auto rifle equivalent, and a shotgun. But there are like perk stations, and those perk stations are randomized, so they may give you different skills here and there, but it's not persistent. And I think in Gunfire Reborn, it's that sometimes you do wish for that persistence, but that's where the rogue-like pieces come in, is that, you hope for a good pull, but you never know what you're going to get. Okay, well, that is a newer game, but Game Logic, you have gone back to well, I guess maybe there is a newer tie because Witcher Season 2 came out on Netflix, but I'm going to guess that your return to The Witcher 3 on PC was not related to Henry Cavill and the Netflix series. So what brought you back to Witcher 3?
And actually, DBQ, I want to make an in-the-moment request to reshuffle the agenda and talk about Bloodborne at this point.
Excuse me. Yes, I will honor that request from the gentleman in the Punisher hat.
Because I think there are some similarities to my experience in that and Swiss's experiences in Gunfire Reborn. Because most would suspect, I suspect, that my time in Bloodborne was not enjoyable. And I've been trying to kind of put my finger on how I felt exactly about the game, and I think Swiss helped me through that a little bit with his commentary, which is, I don't know that I dislike my time in Bloodborne. I'm just not entirely good at it. Some of that has to do with me, some of that has to do with the game, but and some of this theme is going to be the same in The Witcher 3, but every moment I'm in combat, the game feels great. And so most people know Bloodborne are in the Soulsborne kind of games. I'm not entirely sure how the lineage from Bloodborne relates forward, just in terms of like those games' design and the distinct differences between them. Bloodborne is obviously one of these games from Software that people tout as being very difficult, and so it only appeals to a certain niche crowd of gamer. I came by the game by way of I think it's the PlayStation. Is it called the PlayStation Plus Collection?
Yes, on PlayStation 5. Yep. PS Plus Collection.
So it's the thing that you get, when you buy a PlayStation 5.
I see it in the background with your Pulse headset around it. Yep.
So for everyone who claims that because I periodically defend or correct the understanding of Xbox and their strategy and their business deals, I do now have audio apps for you. Yeah, sorry. Which one do you want to... I guess Siri decided that I was talking to her. I was not. I did put my PlayStation 5 in this background of the podcast, so you can see that I am an equal opportunity gamer. So I decided one of the things I kind of put in my game picking algorithm for this year was to make sure that I got back to these games in the PlayStation Plus collection, because quite honestly, I don't, and I haven't, and it's a value. It's part of what I paid for, and I need to, consume some of it and get some ROI. And I did want to, upon the recommendation of a lot of friends who have said that Bloodborne is something you should play whether you're good at it or not, or the Souls games, I decided I wanted to give it a whirl. It is definitely something that I will come back to. The things that are bad in it for me, the things that make it, a thing that I'm not well suited for, is I have a hard problem. And let me say flat out, I don't like boss battles. That is part of my inherent problem being a gamer, is that I have just, for time immemorial, not liked boss battles. I feel like they are boring and kind of mundane to me, and when I love something like Destiny, right, where you're not in a boss battle like 80% of the time, and there's a continuity and a flow, and you keep going from engagement to engagement to engagement, I enjoy that part of the game, right? But then I have to deal with like these periodic boss battles and things that get flown up like in your face. Most of the problem I have with boss battles is I feel like they always default to some kind of cheesy, like I've got a secret kind of approach to defeating the gamer. There are certain aspects of boss battles that I hate. Like I can't stand boss battles that, I think I talked about this on maybe last week on the podcast. I can't stand boss battles where they take away part of your capability. Like, don't train me and teach me and institutionalize me to the way a game operates and the way that I work within the environment, and then take some of that away from me. You're free to change the environment, right? And but like, let me approach it with all the tools that you've trained me to use and that I've earned, right? And so I talked about how that kind of...
So is your Red Dead conversation.
Yes, yeah. No, very good. Thank you for listening, because I don't think you were on last week, but or you were, sorry. So yeah, that's like, and the same is kind of true here. And I mentioned like how I appreciate kind of the approach that Ori and the Will of the Wisps took, where they do that thing. They always leave you with all the tools that they change the environment. So one of the things I'm not good at is if in a boss battle you have to learn a pattern and do a thing 19 times the same way and execute it perfectly, inevitably my failure is always that I'm fine executing it like 11 times, but in the course of replaying the boss battle, right, I will redo it 11 times, 15 times, 17 times, right? I've talked about the golf swing analogy, right? Get myself right up to that point where I'm like, I can do this, but I really can't, right? I convince myself to keep slogging away at it. And that is Bloodborne, right? You, like, all of your major engagements are kind of sort of like boss battles or mini boss battles. And I mean, even when you are learning the game and just like the first initial encounters kind of come at you like a boss battle, there's singular enemies, there are things that you have to figure out in their pattern, and then you have to learn the tactic to take them down and execute that perfectly, like a repetitious number of times. And then eventually they scale those enemies up to larger numbers, and you realize that they're just kind of the common fodder enemies, right? And then you kind of start the do loop all over again with new encounters that you go on. Other parts of the problem with the game design that I don't entirely appreciate, and most of my problems with the game design are not about like inherent difficulty. I'm fine with the game being hard. I dislike what I would qualify as kind of the quality of life aspects of the game, or the things that are not conducive to gameplay directly, right? And one of those things is the logistics, right? Every time you go back to your little hub spot, right, to resort your weapons and level up and get new equipment and stuff, and you come back, the enemies respawn. And in a lot of cases, there could be a significant amount of travel distance from your fast travel point to that first engagement. So in the first level of the game, like I just had to trudge like numerous times from like the respawn point out to where like the first engagement goes, which is a lengthy engagement because you have to, at least the way I approach it, you have to get in the guy's line of sight, lure him back to an open area so that you're not fighting him in a constrained space, and then do this series of actions 19 times perfectly in order to take him down. So, an upside was I played a lot of the game more than I had to with no weapons, and so I was trying to approach a lot of these things just in hand to hand, and then somebody gave me a tip, and I realized that I needed to go back, like in the Hunter's Dream, and push further into that, like board that level to get through a couple kind of encounters of NPCs that you meet along the way, and like monuments or whatever that you approach to get like my first set of weapons. And then combat actually seemed, I mean, my feeling is the combat's not that hard. It's just that you have to do a move 19 times in a row, and you have to do it perfectly well, which is what I fail at. And so there are sections of the game that are very enjoyable, but at a certain point, I have to, do them over and over again. The other part of my experience is it's very anxiety-inducing, where, like, and I understand that people will feel that this is a good element of game design, but, like, you're constantly under threat, and, like, moving 5 feet puts you at risk, right? And so that's good and that's fine, but there's also, like, no point where you can ever kind of chill and relax. There's no like loggy point like there is in a Destiny 2, right, where you can kind of gather your thoughts, switch your weapons around, do some like administrivia, and then get back to it. So I find that a little bothersome, but mainly like the way respawn points are treated and the way enemies respawn is like part of my big problem with it. But the reason I wanted to move it up, and the reason I thought that, things that Swiss mentioned were applicable, is like the game is kind of like a mini roguelite, like in a lot of ways because of those elements. But the game itself, right, the do loop inside those kind of acerbic endpoints, right, is really actually really enjoyable. And it's the reason why I'm not, I didn't immediately take it off my playlist like I did with my first Red Dead 2 encounter a few years ago.
Did you play Sekiro?
I did not, but part of my thought is that sticking with something like Bloodborne will then open up the aperture to games like Sekiro, so I can feel more comfortable putting them on my playlist.
I traded Bloodborne back after like 2 hours, but I liked Sekiro.
Okay.
So like I feel like it went. Sekiro has that like challenge, but it went more towards the action gameplay than than Bloodborne, and maybe it's not as much of a trudge. But
yeah, and I have heard, I saw on Twitter like yesterday, I saw somebody who had like ranked the games in order of difficulty, again just from her opinion, but there is a clear like thought out there that like those games in that series and in that ilk and framework do have different levels of approachability. And yeah, it's good to hear that maybe at some point when I get done slogging away at Bloodborne, since I didn't really pay out of pocket for it directly, that maybe I should, you know, sidestep and try out Secure. I always try and pronounce it the correct way, Swiss, and I always screw it up.
I wasn't even pronouncing it the correct way.
So yeah, I mean it arguably puts that game like within my target line, whereas before it just absolutely would not have been. Yeah.
And then one last really fast, quick question on boss battles. Is that why you hate Shadow of the Colossus?
Well, I don't hate Shadow of the Colossus. I mean, I had this conversation.
Right? If we didn't stir the pot enough for the first half hour, now let's stir the pot with Shadow of the Colossus.
No. I mean, it's a valid question, right? And actually, I've had this conversation recently too, right? Like, when I speak negatively about a game I haven't played, it's not that I dislike the game, obviously, because I haven't played it. It's that the game hasn't done what it needs to do from a marketing and messaging perspective to make me feel like warranted to put it in my time management space, right? But yeah, because the design messaging for Shadow of the Colossus is that it's just boss battle to boss battle to boss battle, I have not been inclined to take my time out to go play it. And I realize I could be wrong, but like, it's on them to message the game too, right? So
I am your ambassador.
I will join you in this. That Shadow of the Colossus is the you have downtime, you have a chance to breathe in between. It is not a boss rush mode.
Okay.
Right? That you can encounter those bosses at your own pace. I mean, there is a linearity to them, but you don't necessarily. I spent just as much time exploring that world, than I did encountering the bosses. But, at the same time, I spent a whole lot more time exploring Breath of the Wild's world than trying to even attempt to encounter bosses there, because that was just not, the interest there was not there. So okay. I think it cuts all kinds of different ways. So,
all right, well, I'll try and squeeze it in between Red Dead Redemption 2, Destiny, Call of Duty, The Division 2, and my Formula 1 2020 seasons.
You might as well just wait till the 25th anniversary of it. So,
I'm just joking.
Anyhow, yeah.
We'll see if it comes across my radar.
So, Swiss, the other game that you want to talk about is not necessarily the artistic kind of pinnacle that the PlayStation 2 era Shadow of the Colossus was held up to be, but it sure can be a lot of fun. So you're playing Overcooked All You Can Eat on the Switch. Does this mean that you're playing it with your family? And how many arguments has that created?
Yes, I'm playing it with my wife and 2 oldest children. And I will say that it does not bring out the best in me. It brings out the angry dad in me. And
Oh,
get over here. Give me that plate.
What are you doing? You're just standing there doing nothing. I'm over here working and you're just standing there. So obviously we're not doing this optimized. I gave you your job. You need to do your job. If I told you to cut the lettuce and put it on the conveyor belt, cut the lettuce and put it on the conveyor belt.
That's a good dad voice, by the way. That's a voice of dad experience. There you go. I have
a lot of practice. But
is it as divisive as Mario Party?
Mario Party, because you're competing, like that actually is probably better for me because I like to win.
Well, and I think Mario Party, there's enough stupid randomness that you blame the game more than you blame each other. Like this is Overcooked. I played with my family on the PlayStation, and yeah, you all have to kind of work together to. It's the Diner Dash of multiplayer games that you've got to, cook the food, chop the food, plate the food, serve the food, clean the food, cycle it back and forth.
Now, when we succeed in getting 3 stars, it feels good. Because I can't move on unless we get 3 stars and completely defeat a level properly.
Oh, okay, Dad.
So,
now I see where this is going.
But I guess we're having quality time.
So was this a holiday gift, or is this something that's been sitting in your backlog to play over the holidays with the family? How did this come up?
I think one of the kids got a $20 eShop gift card, so we picked it up. And I like games that we can play together. It's just maybe not the best with my OCD perfectionism. I don't know, but it's it's fun. It's fun and raging at the same time.
It's like a counseling session for families. Like there's a tense family dynamic, and who takes the lead, who's submissive in things, who's pushing back on the authoritarian order that someone else is creating. Yes, there's a lot of layers within an Overcooked game. I mean, this is similar. Last year you played Moving Out, didn't you? But you played that with a friend rather than family.
Moving Out.
Was it Moving Out or Unpacked?
Unpacking is the more recent one. Moving Out was like the physics-based one where two people are trying to move all the furniture.
I don't think that might have been Tao. I played Heave Ho.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay.
But I played that with a friend, so we were on, I don't know, much better behavior, I guess.
Fair enough. A few social norms still exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of, I don't even have a good transition for that. So actually, I kind of do in terms of social norms that do not exist. It's NFL playoff season. And so I jump back into Madden 22. I have Madden 22 on. I've been playing Madden 21 in a franchise with friends, but Madden 22 I have on Xbox Series X. And so I wanted to dive in, start a new franchise there, and pick up one of the teams that had a coach fired and do a rebuild and do a franchise. But I've been playing franchises in Madden for over a decade now. I mean, over 2 decades at this point. Right? Madden 2000. Wow. Anyhow, but you can't. Well, I mean, you can kind of force it. But so in the franchise, and Madden 21 had this as well, is that you could you could do an active roster of you could use whatever the game had your default roster, or if you downloaded a roster, you could have that as your starting spot, or you could jump into the season at any point in the season and pick up a team. So if you go through week by week, it mirrors the NFL schedule. And so in week 15, Jacksonville only has 2 wins and they're about to fire their coach. But week 15 is as far as it goes. It has been, week 16, 17, 18. We're heading into the playoffs. There's been no updates. There is a month of Reddit posts and forum posts that Madden franchise has not been updated, or this piece has not been updated in terms of jumping in. At first, people thought it was just a holiday break, but there's been no communication from Twitter feeds or the Reddit channels where people in the community feeds have participated. So there's no communication about whether or not they're coming back to update this, or if you're just kind of stuck in week 15. So, and then to make matters even worse, before the holiday season, for a couple weeks before the holiday season, and now post-holiday return, that the community share file servers have been down. So if you want to try to import a draft class of the most recent or a historic draft class, one of the reasons that Madden 20 is on when the Xbox did their 20th anniversary, and Madden 20 was one of my top 3 games played on Xbox One, is that my friend and I downloaded historic draft classes, and you could play through with all kinds of different people. But that server's down, and it is down. And again, there's no communication. But what Madden does have communication about is that there is a new Nickelodeon crossover event coming to Madden. So Rugrats and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are going to be in the yard, so that you could have maybe some Donatello helmet or some Reptar shoulder pads. But that piece is coming, but no updates on kind of the franchise server community, and that isn't necessarily generating microtransactions. So there's my piece there.
So help me understand. I mean, you're embedded in this culture. Like, I haven't been around it a lot, and I've never, even when I played Madden in heavy rotation, I was never part of like the online community, so I don't understand like all the dynamics around it. Help me understand how the community views these. It sounds like it's week-to-week franchise updates that reflect dynamics that are ongoing in the actual NFL.
So it's not necessarily an ongoing franchise update. That these are. It's like in NBA 2K. It's the play now. It's the what's going on. Like right now, this week or today in NBA, there's these games, and you could jump in and actually play those.
Okay.
But what this mode in the, like, when you start a franchise, you either start from the preseason, or you can jump in and take a team at some point along the line. And what that's allowed people to do is, in the past, to jump in at the end of a season before the playoffs and kind of start, getting ready for the postseason, where rather than starting at the beginning of a season after all the drafting has happened, you can sim to the end of a season and jump ahead and start the off-season work of rebuilding a team. And so kind of in that, the franchise community, the rebuild aspect is certainly a function there. And it's a small piece of many different parts of a game. But I think the bigger piece is also the community servers that are down, that don't allow people. And there's still server stability issues this far out into the season, where, once I start pulling on the thread of what's broken, there's all kinds of other things that online franchises, head-to-head games, get server crashes on a consistent basis on new platforms. On 9th gen. So a number of kind of struggles that Madden still has in terms of a stable game.
So the first topic you were talking about, so this is for people who are they're kind of playing the real NFL season week to week, almost like it's kind of episodic content is kind of why it's important.
To jump in, like in the past, they've had the ability to kind of jump in and play a playoff. Right? Like, you could come in and play this week's matchups if you wanted to. I wouldn't call it important. I would call it a feature that worked in previous years that is not currently working. And,
the company doesn't say anything about it.
Yeah. There's either not communication, or it's not a new feature where, there's probably some stability issues, but it's for a franchise that has given some effort to improving. For a game franchise that's given some effort to improving its franchise mode and been out there front and center saying that we are going to have updates around this, to then be having pieces of it that are still not functional, is kind of contrary.
Yeah. Is that are people using that for PvP? Or are they playing, just against
both,
the CPU?
Right? If you could do a connected franchise and have an online league, or an individual kind of offline league as well. Either way, it's still stuck. People have tried it multiple different ways. It's still stuck.
With that old roster import, could you import like the class of, I forget what class he was, like 80 whatever, and bring Doug Flutie into the NFL?
Sure. It was, the community could build any class, like they could populate it. And so, then you could bring in, we had classes from the 80s, 90s, 2000s. So you had just a hodgepodge of names, all over the generations. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And I haven't tracked it. I know that it came up like on the news radar at some point, but I haven't tracked it. Has the NCAA reboot come out yet?
No,
Okay.
it's still, there's not even any kind of screenshots or discussion about structure or game modes or anything like that.
Okay.
More of it's early development piece.
Okay. Sorry, I had one other. And is this is the first year of a full console generation 9 only version of Madden?
So no, there's still cross. I mean, there's last gen version,
Okay.
and there's this gen. This is the second year on the new gen engine. So last year there was an Series X and PlayStation 5 game that came out in November, while the rest of Madden launched in August or so. So it's their second year in this engine.
Okay.
Which again is kind of where it's the struggle of, if this was their first year, I would feel more forgiving.
Right.
So I'm going to stick on the sports piece here and use it as a segue, because I was talking a little bit about 2K in terms of the play now and this week. And so when my Madden franchise was not going to happen, I dipped into 2K a little bit, because 2K and Take-Two have been in the news this week with their $12.7 billion acquisition of Zynga. So this is less about me and my Take-Two franchise or my character and microtransactions, but I think the microtransactions part of this really does tie into the news story about why Take-Two would be paying $12.7 million for Zynga. And Game Logic, I think back to a podcast that you and I did about 5 years ago at this point. We were going over financials and end of the year reports, and 2K, it was their first year where they had more revenue. Both 2K and EA had more revenue in recurrent transactions and microtransactions than they did in single game sales.
Well, and for their mobile divisions as well, right?
Yes, right. I mean, I think we've seen this trend moving. I mean, 2K definitely brings in money with their My Card, for whether it's, WWE or the NBA, where you're paying to basically collect cards and battle them at a random piece. But Zynga has definitely showed us that, even all the way back into Farmville on Facebook, that whales were a thing in terms of free to play and microtransactions.
Right, and Activision as well.
Yeah,
I mean, so you're hitting the nail on the head, right? Because most of the lots of the gamer community who doesn't track the financials and the industry trends, like we do, have been asking, why would they do that? Why would they do that, right? Because Activision has Call of Duty Mobile, and that thing is a stinking beast, right? Because EA has an incredibly large mobile division, because gaming companies, core gaming companies are gobbling up these mobile game companies and making them individual standalone divisions, and they are huge revenue movers, and they are moving more money than their core gaming divisions in a lot of cases. I was in a Twitter Spaces today, and I got asked a very pertinent, valid question, which is, in Microsoft's strategy of, going after the 2 billion gamers who, live on the other side of the digital divide and don't have the money to cross the entry barrier of buying a piece of hardware to get into the Xbox ecosystem. And she was like, why would they do that instead of doing what Take-Two has done, right? Which is go out and get a mobile gaming division, and deploy that way, because they're bringing over these complicated controller schemes, right? And other things that kind of go along as extra baggage, with kind of core gaming content. And from a Western perspective, I appreciate what Microsoft is doing, and I see what they're doing, and I see the efficiencies to be gained and the continuity. And one of the big things for me is I don't want them to do that, because, and I don't do Xbox cloud gaming, but if I did, one of the huge benefits would be I go and I play a game on mobile, I come back and I play a game on Xbox, and then I can go and play a game on PC. And I get that now between PC and Xbox, where I leave off on a game, I do my cloud save, and then I flip over and go play the exact same game on PC, and I have continuity of that campaign or wherever I am, or that character or that progression system. I mean, but it's a valid question that she asked, right? And it's going to be interesting to see how these different strategies play out across third-party publishers and people who are going after, cloud streaming of, their content that they already build out, so they don't have to, buy a new division and make investments in R&D for something separate.
Yeah, I think I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add to that analysis, other than I would not I would not be surprised if this 12.7 billion acquisition ends up ultimately bringing in more money than Bethesda and Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda, just by the microtransaction nature of what a fully functioning mobile division brings. So, Swiss, you've got some smirks. Go for it.
As gamers, as like legitimate gamers, does the fact that Zynga will bring in more cash than like a Bethesda depress you?
The thing I was going to mention is the way I'm looking at it is much like your first job as a Formula One driver is to defeat your teammate. I almost think that it gets slightly more interesting to me to see, does Zynga overcome Rockstar as being a revenue generator for 2K? Because that to me is, well, right, if when the conversation becomes 2K is going to start funneling more money to its mobile gaming division than Rockstar, then I feel like that's going to upset the apple cart. I mean, I almost want to say, like, I don't think it should. I almost wouldn't question whether or not they're going to bring in more division than the Bethesda thing, because, I mean, it's funny that they're paying $5 billion more, right, than Microsoft paid for Bethesda. But it doesn't bug me. Trying to say this without being insulting. It's market segmentation, right? The types of gamers that are core in the mobile gaming market and that spend those dollars and that participate heavily in that market segment are different than our market segment. And I don't know that there's a bleed off, right? I don't know that there's core gamers moving, right, from one P&L, right, addressable market to the other. And I don't know that the money that people are pouring into mobile is money that people would inherently be pouring into standard traditional console and PC games.
Yeah, I think that that's a legitimate analysis, Game Logic. That I don't know that they are pulling from one to the other. It is a wider expansion of a market. But yeah, I think that it's less about the emotional piece, but probably more about, for me, it's more about the long-term sustainability of the types of games that we have grown up playing. And maybe even that's why and you've seen this in my what I've been playing over the last half a year. I've been playing a lot more indie stuff, a lot more smaller things, because the sustainability of big, tens of $1 million games also means that they need to sell X amount in order to make that money back. And that's not the case in a mobile space, is that you can get in quick and get out just as fast. We saw this week that also, although it's not that fast, but Microsoft is canceling Forza Street, shutting down Forza Street, which was launched right around the time of the pandemic, actually, as their mobile Forza. And less than 2 years later, it's shutting back down. So the ability within a mobile space to jump in and out, try to make some money, experiment, or make a cash in is a different market strategy.
The eternal tension between like the business and the artist, I guess, type thing.
Sure, we'll take that. Yeah. So we are close to our 90-minute period here, but we've got one more game from you and Game Logic. Do you want to, since I teed up Witcher before, do you want to talk about that at all? Do you have anything there?
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I will yield to Swiss to let him go first, and then I'll loop back on the back end.
That sounds good. Send us out with some Witcher talk.
All right. Grim Dawn. My cousin enjoyed the game, hadn't beaten it, and we're looking for a game that we could play, like a campaign type thing together. So it's like a Diablo 2 from a smaller studio. You can like have multiple classes. You kind of like pick one class, and when you level up a little bit, you add a second class. So you can. It's fun. Basically, I enjoyed it. It had that good Diablo feeling. And you got your isometric slash. I chose my class, like I guess they call it the Thor in tongue in cheek, where it's like a melee character with like lightning powers. So I was going through the level and electrocuting all the zombies in my path. So it was. I haven't gotten into it far enough yet to like see if the enjoyment will wear off and it will become a little bit too grindy. Let's put it that way. But as far as a good Diablo 2, those isometric action RPGs, so far it's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
all right. Go ahead. You got a question?
My one question is, Grim Dawn or Torchlight?
I haven't played Torchlight.
Oh, really?
No. So I can't put the comparison in.
Okay, well, the next Steam sale, we are going to have some Torchlight 2 gifts. So
yeah, if I got to play Sekiro, then you got to play Torchlight.
Yeah.
That's fair.
We won't make you play Torchlight 3. We'll go back to a good Torchlight.
Right.
And
I would be fine with original Torchlight.
Yeah, that's good too. One of the things I love about Torchlight, both 1 and 2, is just the amount of mods that the community has made within Steam and how much it kind of adds to the game as well.
Yeah.
So my last transition is a game that is not getting a next generation mod in any time soon in terms of Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, but you are playing Witcher 3 on PC.
Yeah, and that's okay. Those guys need to fix Cyberpunk, so I'm okay not getting a Witcher 3 update. It's really amazing, Swiss, how you are segueing so well from your games into mine, because what's bugging me about The Witcher 3 right now is the grind. And so what I'm discovering as I chew a little bit more into the game, and I've only taken The Witcher 3 as a snack, right? I've never really kind of bitten into the whole apple. But now trying to do that, the problem that I'm running into is where I am, I have to level up 2 more levels to be able to continue on with the campaign. Which means having completed all of the core campaign quests that I can up to this point, I have nothing to do but do side missions to level up. The problem that I have with The Witcher 3 is that it has a really bad triggering design. And if you guys remember me talking about this before, there was a side mission that I played. I think this was the Devil in the Deep side mission or Devil in the Well side mission. And there were about 5 or 6 different triggers in the mission. And as a software engineering purist, it kind of drives me nuts. The way they strung this together was it was feasible for you to trigger, let's just lay them out in linear sequence and say it's triggers 1 through 6. It was feasible for you to trigger 4 or 5 without having triggered 1, 2, or 3, with the problem being that if you triggered 5, the sequence was then broken. And so there was all sorts of jank where maybe you could never trigger 1, so you had to move on to trigger 3, but it was very difficult to figure out how to trigger 3 because you couldn't inherently trigger it by natural progression from trigger 2 to trigger 3, right? Like, it was just bad, right? And I was like, there should have been locking so that it was not feasible to trigger a follow-on event without having deliberately passed through the original ones, right? And then, go ahead.
I was about to chastise you for not experiencing side quests in an RPG. That's like the whole thing. But if you have some CD Projekt Red glitchiness, then that's a different question.
Right. I was watching your smirk, like you were just waiting for something. So I'm glad you jumped in. That was good.
Yeah, no, I mean, my other experience with RPGs is that, side quests are laid out in there. They can be asynchronous, so you can approach them. You can approach encapsulated side quests in whatever order you want to. But within a chain of events that encapsulate the side quest itself, that you can trigger mini events in there that in some cases can break the side quest so that it cannot be pursued to completion. That is a implementation problem in my mind. And like that devil in the well case, right, is a thing that is known out in the community and has never been fixed by CD Projekt Red. And so what people have done is they have documented, hey, if you break the triggering sequence, right, and you do this, then this is the workaround, right? And that's my problem with it, right? It shouldn't be a workaround that the community has come up with, right? It should be a thing that the developer fixes. So the problem I'm running...
Yes, as someone who knows that I could force win or loss a home team in order to simulate schedule in Madden, it is a workaround. The communities are good at this. We may not be good at staying constructive and non-toxic, but we're good at finding workarounds.
Right. And so the problem I'm running into, right, in addition to that is, and this is a part that's kind of sort of my fault, is I started a game run, I saved, I put it aside for who knows how long, and now I'm finally coming back around to it. And the way the side mission structure is in The Witcher is it's feasible to bypass a triggering event. And so, say if you're passing through the woods and somebody calls for help, it's possible that is a one-time only trigger, and if you bypass it, then when you come back, that person's gone. They've been eaten by a monster or whatever. And so there are a few things where that's happened, and so before I got to that point, I just gave up and had gone to a side quest guide. The fact that there exists a guide dedicated to side quests is kind of indicative that there might be kind of an endemic problem. But like my problem now is, so if you list like 15 side quests in the first area, the problem is that there are some that I've completed, so it took me a while to figure out how to dig through the menu and find the side quests that I completed. But then the other thing is that, like I mentioned, there are these ones that are one-time triggers that aren't really they're not. There's no guide that tells you which ones are the one-time triggers and which ones are persistent. And so if I've bypassed them, I bypassed them so long ago that I don't remember that I passed by like the person calling for help or whatever. So I'm kind of in a side quest dump loop where I'm trying to figure out where in the heck I am. Right? If side quests kind of had a progression framework of their own, I'm trying to figure out where in that framework I kind of am, so I can figure out where best to pick up. And what I'm having to do is just do random hash and trash that I happen to bypass and encounter along the way until I kind of get that whole thing resynced. And then hopefully, I will have learned enough of my lesson to not have this problem in the next area, where I will probably keep some kind of like mini journal in a digital log in a Microsoft Notepad file right in my game folder or something, so I don't forget next time.
So while I will completely give you the point that a CD Projekt Red game is going to have some jank and there are side quest pieces that are broken, I also want to say that as an RPG player, side quest guides are par for the course, right? I can show you a bookshelf of Prima guides that are this thick because the main quest is 100 pages and there's 400 pages around the side quest that Square has developed, right? I mean, so that idea is part and parcel with an RPG. The fact that they can be broken and sequence break is a whole nother problem, let alone like sometimes the sequence of a side quest is essential. But yes, I will give you the point that it is frustrating in a gameplay environment at this point where we have smoothed a lot of those rough edges of needing to consult a guide to figure out for all the let's say for all the hard time that Swiss may give Destiny for its non-transparency about what to do. There's a reason for guides. They're still out there. And
I stand corrected. I guess I am accustomed to side quests being covered in a guide. I'm not accustomed to there being I'm accustomed to there being one guide, right, and there being a section for like mainlining the campaign and then chapters, right, for the side quests. I am not accustomed to like there is a dedicated URL for a discrete instance of a side quest guide. Red is almost entirely disconnected from like the main guide. Was just kind of a new experience for me.
Nice. Well, as we disconnect from this podcast, as we've hit our time period, I want to thank you both, gentlemen, for taking time, Game Logic and SwissGuard, for allowing us to kind of dive into some heavier, weightier topic at the beginning, but also give ourselves a little bit of a hard time along the way with our gameplay and choices. So I appreciate the conversation. I value the fact that we have the ability to have this dialogue, to challenge each other, maybe not always agree, but to have a space that we can have these conversations. So next week, we will be back here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This will be our Pickz Plays episode. So we do give ourselves some assignments as well still. And in this new format, as we're kind of peppering in new stories, we also are still going to keep with giving ourselves an assignment. And that assignment is going to come every other week because we don't like deadlines and we want to give ourselves a chance to play some other things rather than just the assignment. But the assignment for next week is, after last week's news stories around Ken Levine's new studio, or, Ghost Games studio. Ghost Games? No, not Ghost Games. Is that right? Okay. That it's still in pre-production and, realization phases, that visualization phases. We're looking back on Ken Levine games or people connected to the Irrational Studio. So a chance to go back and revisit some of those games in terms of design, how they hold up, what new things they brought within a contextual context of the time period, or are there things that they still do unique? So that is our assignment for us. SwissGuard, Game Logic, any other thoughts before we head out tonight?
Just one alibi, lest we be frost-cruined for making an error. So I was wrong by giving you the head nod. It is Ghost Story Games.
There we go, because Ghost Games is the Need for Speed, right? I knew it was wrong because I can picture the logo on Need for Speed. So thank you for correcting me. All right. And with that correction, we will correct ourselves out of the evening. So for myself, DBQ Hams, Game Logic, and SwissGuard, thank you for joining us here on episode 224 of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. Hope you'll come back to us next week. Thanks for joining in the conversation, whether it's tonight or as we continue to listen and engage with each other and the industry. So play the games you love those you play with. Take care and stay safe. Good night.